Welcome all. We begin this webinar by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet and recognize the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples. We affirm our collective commitment to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. Today, I'm very happy to be calling in from the unceded territories of the Sinixt, the Shu, Kwetna, Tanaha, and Silts people. Next slide, please. So, welcome everyone. My name is Jill Zacharias, and I'm the BC Manager of Growth and Impact at the Tamarack Institute. I'm excited to introduce our topic today. At 42%, the working poor make up the single largest group of people living in poverty, 1.6 million people. We know that working poverty is on the rise, in part due to the evolving nature of work, including a growing precarious labor market for essential work, increasing contract labor in the gig economy, and decreasing job tenure at the low end of the job market. The pathway to ending working poverty requires governments, employers, nonprofits, and people living in poverty to work together. Today's webinar is part of an important ongoing conversation necessary to ending working poverty in BC. We have a strong, diverse panel, and I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers. The Honourable Nicholas Simons is the BC Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction and Vice Chair of the Cabinet Committee on Social Initiatives. Minister Simons was first elected MLA for Powell River Sunshine Coast in 2005 and has been subsequently re-elected to this day. Prior cabinet work focused on mental health, addictions, homelessness, children, and youth. Prior to his election, Minister Simons served in the areas of health, justice, social services, and child welfare, as well as working for the Sechelt Nation. Morag Carter and Tara Howse are from the Trail and Rossland area of BC, where the Women Creating Change project implemented leading-edge specialized programming for women. Morag is the executive director of the Trail Community Skills Center, which led the project, while Tara was the lead consultant. Morag has over 25 years experience in community economic development and environmental stewardship. She is a skilled organizational leader and believes deeply that investment in knowledge building and staff development creates the framework for personal and organizational success. Morag's passion remains workplace and workforce diversity and inclusion. Tara is the president of Howse Business Solutions and has been in rural community economic development field for 15 years. Her work has addressed a variety of challenges, from improving access to housing and active transportation to investment readiness assessments, women's economic security, and Indigenous settler relations. Matthew Lowe, is the director of CommunityPlus Care, located in Victoria, BC. Matthew has been from caregiver to coordinator to director over the last 15 years of community health in both public and private sectors. CommunityPlus Care is the first private sector home healthcare company in BC to become a certified living wage employer. Matthew is passionate about creating decent work that pays a living wage with benefits in an industry notorious for lower wages and precarious working conditions. Last but definitely not least, Parliamentary Secretary Adam Walker was elected as the MLA for the Parksville-Qualicum area in 2020 and is now the Parliamentary Secretary for the New Economy in the BC Ministry of Labour. Adam is a small business owner a former town councillor, and a farmer. When a town councillor for Qualicum Beach, he prioritized housing, enhancing public spaces, and community engagement. He has owned and operated a tech business in the region for over 15 years. So a huge welcome all, and many, many thanks for joining us on today's webinar. To kick off today's discussion, I would like to invite Minister Simons to provide an overview of the provincial strategies and initiatives targeted to address working poverty. Good afternoon, Minister Simons.
Hi, Jill, and hello, everybody. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm speaking to you from Victoria, where we're in session. And this is the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. I generally represent an area that is the home of the Tla'amin, Sechelt, Hamalko, Klahoose, and Squamish nations on the Sunshine Coast. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I looked forward coming back, having been with you not that long ago, but I'm glad to be back. And so as a proponent of good advocacy, I'd like to say thank you, first of all, to the Tamarack Institute for engaging people on important issues and keeping issues in front of the public and holding governments to account. You know, I think that's an important part of the work that people in our communities do, and I appreciate it. Poverty and the need to address poverty is one of the issues, obviously, and today we have a chance to talk about it in a bit more detail. And I'm looking forward to hearing other perspectives, including my colleague from across the Salish Sea, Adam Walker. Good to see you, Adam. Many of you know that I sat in opposition from 2005 to 2017, and then as a private member until October of last year. So when I was appointed Minister of Social Development, it's coming up to a year in this position. I have to say it's a ministry that I wanted to lead at one point. And in fact, my first job in the public service was in this ministry as a financial assistance worker, they used to call us. And so I've come back to the ministry and I'm really pleased to be able to at least make efforts to continue working to reduce poverty in British Columbia. But my previous career, as Jill mentioned, was working as the Health and Social Service Director for the Sechelt Nation, and prior to that as a child protection social worker. So it's made me aware in no uncertain terms of the impact of poverty on children. And now that I have an opportunity to actually propose policies that will alleviate poverty, or at least the impact of poverty, I'm really glad to have so many good advisors in the community and in the ministry to help me with that process. I note that in the child protection world, more than half the children who come into care come from families who may be receiving income or disability assistance. And I find that very telling, and it highlights the importance of the work that we do for families. And I'm really pleased that we have this opportunity to focus on the working poor. I wouldn't say an overlooked segment, because it's a large segment, as was mentioned, but one that really does require our fulsome attention. And so that I'm pleased to be able to, I'll outline some of the policies of our government that I think specifically address, go some distance to address the issues that people who are living and working in poverty are facing. For a long time, when I was in opposition, I remember hearing government members at the time saying that the best poverty reduction plan was a job. And a former minister actually said that, and I'm not going to relitigate arguments, but we know that we were the last province in Canada to implement a poverty reduction strategy, and it's known as Together BC, and it's been in effect now for a few years. And in fact, we've been noticing some good trends. And but just thinking that a job was enough, that it would overcome other factors that have an impact on a person's ability to live comfortably in their community, we neglected, or government at the time neglected, to look at education, intergenerational trauma, issues around transportation, childcare, inadequate housing, and now in the last 20 months, the impact of a second public health emergency, acknowledging the opioid crisis as well as the COVID pandemic. When you look at those other factors, it's obvious why we needed an approach that was cross-governmental, a strategy that would focus on affordability, opportunity, social inclusion, and reconciliation, not just employment. So it's an important, obviously everyone in this workshop knows the importance of a broad approach to a complicated and complex issue. So our plan was to reduce poverty in British Columbia by 25% overall by 2024, and the percentage of children living in poverty by 50%. And I just want to say at this point that, you know, as much as we focus on reaching goals, and it's important to have those goals, the 50% reduction isn't where we want to end. We want to be able to reach further than that, obviously, with the goal of eliminating poverty. My job title is poverty reduction, but in my mind, it's social development and poverty elimination. And you have to aim that way, I think. So many of you will know that earlier this month, we tabled the 2020 annual report on Together BC. And based on the statistics that we set in legislation as to how we measure our successes or failures, as it may be, we found that there are actually 185,000 fewer people living in poverty, and that includes 81,000 fewer children living in poverty. So in terms of percentages, it was a 29% reduction in overall poverty and a 57% reduction in the child poverty rate. Now, as a longtime resident of the opposition benches, I point out that these statistics don't always say that, describe the full picture. There's a lag in the statistics or in the data that we're using to measure this, and COVID obviously has had a big impact on that. But I would also point out that it's interesting to note that the number of people receiving income and disability assistance has remained rather stable over that period of time. And that's probably, well, it's likely in part due to the fact that our government recognized this immediate challenge for people living in poverty or in low income. And we provided things like the recovery benefit, which was $1,000, and a number of other initiatives which had an impact on reducing poverty. Now, these other initiatives, I could go into some detail, transportation costs, eliminating transit fares for people under 12, making more housing available with the application of a speculation tax, and investing actually billions of dollars in housing, increasing the minimum wage, preventing rent evictions, and limiting rent increases, among others. We're funding rent banks, and I always point out that we have actually invested in, made the largest investment in a new social program in British Columbia, and that's the childcare program, where we've actually funded nearly 26,000 new spaces over the last 3 years alone. But it's not just the number of spaces, it's the cost as well. And as of this past summer, there were some 65,000 childcare spaces. The fees for those spaces were reduced, and many families were able to receive the affordable childcare benefit, which provides up to $1,250 each month. So as well, I would be remiss not to mention the Child Opportunity Grant, and it's not just about income, and I don't want to sort of focus only on income, but I did mention some other initiatives as well. Education, supporting adult basic education and English language learning by offering free tuition, which was a reversal of the previous government's policy, and really trying to promote skills to bridge into post-secondary education or employment. I know Parliamentary Secretary Walker will be talking about employment a little bit more and the economy. And I think it's just important to recognize that the cross-government approach is fundamentally important. we all have a role to play, and it's not just my ministry which deals with those who are receiving assistance. It really has to do with a strong economy and setting the right sort of template for people to be successful. So, and in my ministry alone, I would also point out that since 2017, we've increased social assistance and disability assistance rates 3 times for a total of $325, recognizing that these are steps in the right direction. And I'm glad that we were able to make these steps. And we will always say that there will be more to do. And I'm always trying to find ways of improving policies for people and families. With that, I think we recognize that the pandemic has had an impact on so many families, working families, and it's fundamentally important that we have a discussion about its impact. And I'm really pleased to be able to be here to listen to the other panelists, and I look forward to doing that. So thank you very much again for the opportunity to be here with you, and I look forward to listening along with everyone else. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Minister Simons. We really appreciate kind of that broad overview of the initiatives that you have taken. Now we will hear from the nonprofit sector, where the Women Creating Change project impacted the lives of lower income women, local industry practices, as well as subsequent programming. So I'll turn it over to Tara and Morag.
Morag, are you there?
Oh, sorry about that. I have a colleague who actually holds up a sign to say that I'm on mute. But in any event, before we start, Tara and I would, I think, just like to acknowledge that we live and work on the unsurrendered traditional territories of the Kanaha, Sinixt, Silks, and Secwepemc First Nations in the way that Jill does too. So we just want to talk a little bit about the project Women Creating Change. This was a 3-year project which was led by Tara Howse with the support of project partners, including the Skills Centre and our colleagues at the Trail Family and Individual Resources Society. The project received $272,000 from the Status of Women Canada over a 3-year period. That ministry is now, of course, the Ministry of Women and Gender Equality. And the objective was to support women in low income or precarious employment. A key element of the project was its strong focus on transformational change. The project has had a long-lasting impact on both the community and the Skills Centre. And I'm just going to hand this over to Tara, who is going to explain what she did.
Thank you. And yes, I was definitely involved, and I was a project coordinator, but it truly was this team effort. And we had a number of organizations and representation on here. And a big piece of this representation was about the advisory committee. And so we had a management team that included the Skills Centre and our local family and individual resource society. But it was this advisory committee that we decided right off the top had to be representative of people in low income. So we made sure that 50% of the advisory committee were either people in low income or recently experienced low income. To really drive the strategic direction of this project. And so all of our research and all of our projects and activities, they all came back to the advisory committee and kind of just did this back and forth iterative process to ensure that things were, relevant and locally based. We can all read a report, but does it actually make sense in your area? And does it make sense to the people involved? And so, like I said, we spent a good chunk of time trying to develop the structure. And here's sort of a really brief sample of the activities that we did. It's presented in linear fashion, but we all know that these things are never quite this clear cut. But the point being that it was very grounded. And we didn't go into this project as a management team with any type of preconceived ideas on what was going to come out of this project, aside from wanting to implement institutional, systemic, and transformational change. And one of the big things to address that was to ensure that our foundation was really strong. And that foundation was all about feminist forms of data collection and critique. It was also about incorporating mixed methods, so ensuring that we had the quantitative data to go alongside women's stories that we really wanted to bring forward and ensure that women were actually fully empowered throughout this full project. Because we were focusing on these systemic changes, we had to ensure that buy-in from like the industry or other decision makers in the communities really understood the issues in a local context, as well as that data that you get from doing various research projects. And so the first part of our research was actually to determine what income insecurity looked like in our area. You know, we'd never heard of the living wage for this region before. And again, this is 2012. And so that was the first thing. Once again, it was from the advisory committee that said, we need to look at it more than just an hourly income. We need to ensure there's stability involved in that. And that living wage provided that option. We then started heavy into the research. And like I said, it was mixed methods with both qualitative and quantitative data. Photo voice being a digital storytelling process that allowed women to go out, take photos, and then tell their stories about their experiences in our area. We also did a gender-based analysis. And once again, this was a really big foundational piece of research that was done for this area. You know, the results aren't going to be surprising to anybody on this call right now, things like gender wage gaps and impacts of health or access to education or childcare. But at the time, a lot of people may have thought that these were issues that occurred in other areas. And so this gender-based analysis combined with the photo voice really brought that home, that these things exist here. I need to make two comments right now on this GBA because at the time we were using 2011 census data. And for anyone who recalls, that was the year the long form census was scrapped. So we had to complement it with other data sources, including interviews and literature reviews. We also, you know, upon reflection, recognized that we did not incorporate intersectionality. So we did not explicitly go out and seek out voices from our Indigenous neighbors and friends, from people of color or the queer community. It was an absolute omission, but I am really happy to say, and Morag will speak to this a little bit, that the Skills Center and both as individuals and an organization are incorporating those concepts now. We developed a community plan with appropriate priorities, and then shifted into this idea of creating a community accord, and then presented the research, the community plan, and the community accord, which recognized the contribution of women in our community. Presented this to over 400 people in our area. The priorities really stemmed around two key areas about retaining and getting women into non-traditional fields of work, again, looking at that living wage as the benchmark, and then identifying and helping women access education and training, just to get them a foot in the door and encourage that upgrading of skills. We had a number of actions, which I'm turning over now to Morag to go over.
So the tree of life might be a little overused in terms of a metaphor, but we actually think that it's the appropriate metaphor for the programming that continues to emerge from the vision of the Women Creating Change project. For example, in 2017, the Skills Center became the first official living wage employer in the area, even though we had been calculating it since 2012. And we're still responsible for calculating the annual living wage rate in the region. 2 bursary programs have been developed. The first one was the Stepping Out bursary, which flew directly from the Women Creating Change project. And that bursary supports up to 6 women each year living in poverty with up to $1,000 each to access whatever training and supports are needed, such as childcare, transportation, books, or tuition, that will enable the bursary recipients to develop careers and step out of poverty. The second is a youth and community bursary that is given to 2 graduating students from low-income families. A requirement of the bursary is that student recipients also have to volunteer in the community. Each student recipient receives $1,000 towards tuition in the post-secondary program of their choice. The third program to come out of this is Working Options for Women, which was a 6-month research project designed to develop opportunities to support women to be more successful in securing and retaining employment in jobs that paid higher than the living wage. Mining and Refining for Women, was a 2-year mentorship program in collaboration with the Trail Operations of Tech Metals Limited. And that program trained 2 cohorts of women for non-traditional jobs at Tech. And this program was developed jointly by Tech and the women that participated in the program, as well as the Skill Center. Thriving for All, which I've talked about many times in these calls, is now the official poverty reduction strategy for 5 municipal governments in the region, and was originally developed with the input of a cross-section of the regional community, including people living in poverty. And this was the model that, that was developed during the Women Creating Change consultations. A new $2 million extended hours daycare is going to be opening in Trail in the fall of next year, which was also developed with the input of parents in the community. And then all of this together, key elements of the original vision of Women Creating Change, research and the programs that have emerged as a result of Women Creating Change continue to be incorporated into the core work of the Skill Center, which are our skills development and training programs. And that includes, as Tara said, as Tara mentioned, the issues where we noticed that there was a shortfall in the research that was done for Women Creating Change. Tara, back to you.
Thanks. And just the last minute here, I have to sum up a little, we did a little reflection on some of the really key elements that we feel has led to the success, you know, going from the very beginning to coming up and hearing there's a childcare center. When I had that email in my inbox that there's a childcare center being developed here, it was just incredible to hear about. And the number one thing is that it was a long-term funding. It was 3 years worth of funding. It wasn't a 6-month project, and it allowed us to create that safe space for women to be involved, be empowered, and share their stories. And we also spent that time developing that foundation. We also had a really strong organizational capacity and local champions. The Skills Center was able to apply for a federal grant. For those who've done that, you know it can be really difficult, as well as the confidence to push back when they were bugging us for stronger actions or more immediate actions. We said, no, we need to take our time. We also had this really, really strong emphasis on the feminist process, like I said, on participatory democracy and ensuring that the advisory committee drove the process. And lastly, the wherewithal from the start to recognize that if we want to talk about transformational change, we have to be able to take this information and knowledge and transfer it into a language that our decision makers, our business leaders will be able to not only understand, but actually really connect with. And so with that, just wanted to say thank you again, everyone, for having us here, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Tara and Morag, for sharing not only the impetus for that project, but just the impacts over time have been. It's just such impactful work. Wonderful to be able to look back on how the project influenced different domains across the sectors, as well as people living in poverty. So now we turn to the private sector, where Matthew Lowe is leading the way, and Matthew is going to share his screen. And so we will just wait 1 minute for that.
Sorry, is it working? Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew, and I am the owner of CommunityPlus. We provide home caregiving from companionship through end-of-life support, plus nursing and foot care across Greater Victoria and Vancouver Island. Today, I'm going to share a little of what goes into starting a home healthcare operation and surviving as a living wage business. We will also touch on influences that shape and distort the market we operate in, and how this encourages or discourages employers who put people first. First, a little background on how we got to this point. My work in home support began in 2007 as a caregiver hired with no experience providing medications, patient handling, catheter care, and bowel care, among other duties. I was cycling across town for split shifts, poor pay, and unpredictable hours of work each week. Turnover was high and clients were unhappy. Having no experience in healthcare, I didn't know what to expect, but this was clearly not working well. Leaving after 4 months, I happened into a government care coordinator position next. Coordinators schedule caregivers to people needing care across time and geography. Visits are usually 1 to 2 hours long, and most people want service within the same peak times. Change is constant. The pieces fall apart as they are put together. It is a bit like playing Tetris on quicksand across time and geography. income security for caregivers is always paramount. Over 10 years, my scale of coordination ranged from a handful of caregivers to over 1,000, over geographic scopes from coordinating a neighborhood to coordinating provincial services between Victoria and Fort St. John. During that time, little changed in terms of the tools we use to support or improve the care experience. Better is possible, but it is not simple. Our operation was started in 2017 with 2 core beliefs. People with personal security are empowered to look beyond their own needs to better provide for others. The short form for this is happy caregivers equals happy clients. And number 2, better tools are needed for complex decision support in care coordination and service delivery. With the right tools, we can drastically improve everyone's experience and run a more efficient operation. I started as a sole proprietor in a competitive market on a shoestring budget, paying a living wage. This required a lot of risk management and calculation, but paying a living wage was never a question and shouldn't be for any business. I calculated a bill rate that would allow us to pay $20 an hour. This was slightly over the living wage at the time, plus bare bones overhead, nothing a conventional business would survive on. And every cost was documented and projected out across various volume scenarios to try to figure out where we would survive at. In addition to coordination, I wore all the operational hats to keep expenses low. This included recruitment, HR, payroll, billing, marketing, advertising, and graphic design. After 5 years of struggle and survival, we have several dozen experienced caregivers, and we are one of the only skilled care providers. There have been many up and downs over this 5 periods of operation, and little has been easy. Our retained earnings last year were under 2%, and cash flow is always tight. However, we have grown by an average of over 50% every year for 5 years. Today, we pay more than 20% over the local living wage. Over 75 cents of every dollar goes to the caregivers, roughly 10 cents to overhead, and 10 cents to research and software development. It's important to me personally that the living wage is not our low water line, because it's not about hitting a definition. It's about ensuring security for people so they can look past their own needs. We also provide dental and extended health from 15 hours worked, which is important for our aging workforce, of which a third are retirees. So though we are small, we are setting the highest pay level in a competitive hiring environment, which we hope will push others to do better. I like to think that we've been a small part of reversing the race to the bottom. One of the biggest challenges is setting rates that allow us to pay our employees what they deserve, while also remaining competitive against other home care agencies. In Victoria, a market distorting force that pushes the bottom lower than it should be is the allocation of government contracts. Government contracts can be extremely beneficial to home support businesses, providing an quote unquote as needed, but relatively constant flow of work, resulting in revenue, but more importantly, increased certainty in hours for caregivers. One distortion from government are contracted bill rates that do not support paying a living wage. Contract rates like these effectively preclude living wage businesses from being considered, and this is part of government supporting poverty. We also have employers who hire caregivers as contractors, even though they do not fit the definition of either dependent or independent contractors. This allows these employers to avoid paying mandatory employment-related costs, allowing them to offer a bill rate more than 20% lower than the lowest market rate. This kind of practice is irritating and disgusting at the best of times, but it becomes a market distortion when it is supported and subsidized with government contracts. This practice has continued locally, supported by government dollars, for over 15 years. Taxes, employer CPP, and other responsibilities are downloaded to the employee, including finding and purchasing personal protective equipment like masks and gloves during the pandemic. This leaves employees with very large end-of-year tax bills that can and have pushed them into financial hardship, including bankruptcy. We have supported numerous caregivers over the years who fell into this trap and are still struggling to recover. And this is part of government subsidizing poverty. We are forced to compete against the non-market prices offered by these businesses, not just in terms of attracting new clients, but also attracting new caregivers who look at the pay rates offered by these businesses, but don't understand or are not aware of the hidden costs. Should we allow any business to pay less than an adequate means to live? Any wage that isn't a living wage promotes poverty and insecurity. At a minimum, government contracts should only be granted to living wage providers. It's not too self-serving, is it? Our primary business costs are wages, mandatory employment-related costs, and benefits. Almost any other business has a smaller proportion of their total costs related to wages. It wouldn't be a hardship for them to meet that standard, but no one wants to give up a profitable and competitive advantage. Certainly not to be the first to do so. It has to be mandated. Businesses would magically adapt to the impossible as they have with COVID, or we would simply lose the jobs that shouldn't exist, and those jobs will be repriced under different employers who are not externalizing hardship onto their employees. Allowing poverty is a choice. Is BC poverty friendly? Our government organizations are putting businesses first who put people last. Meanwhile, our labor regulations are unenforced. Do we support ethical business? Not even with a level playing field. And lastly, here are a few resources for some of you that may appreciate it. To understand the parts of a business, there is a service model tool that puts everything on a single page. If you're involved with improving financial literacy in the community, the wage cost comparison sheet may be useful. And you'll also find Victoria's home care rates, if you're interested in that, and a free community program we provide for end-of-life documents. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Matthew, I think you explained the nature of precarious work and its impacts really well. And we appreciate both your passion and your perspective. Thank you very much. So for our last speaker today, before we turn, hopefully we'll have time for a couple of questions, we turn back to the provincial government and the Ministry of Labour, where Parliamentary Secretary Walker will share some of the important initiatives currently underway.
Thank you, Jill, and hello, everyone. I would like to start by acknowledging the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, on whose traditional territory I'm speaking from today. Thank you as well to the Tamarack Institute for inviting me and Minister Simons to join in today's panel, and for the amazing advocacy that you and your organization do. Organizations like yours have an important role to play as we continue to fight against poverty and inequity in our communities. And discussions like this one today will help us share ideas and actions to advance this work. And to that same point, Matthew, I appreciate your comments as well. I want to also echo Minister Simon's words about how our government is striving to make life better for all people in British Columbia. When people are healthy and safe and prosperous, they play a more active role in supporting families and strengthening our province as a whole. For that reason, we're committed to an economy that works for everyone, regardless of their level of income. It's been clear, especially during the uncertainty of this pandemic, how important it is for workers to have financial security. Even as our economy is changing, workers still depend on fair pay and benefits to support them and their families, and they depend on systems like the workers' compensation when they become injured on the job. Here in BC, most workers are eligible to the employment standards benefits and protections offered by the Employment Standards Act. These include overtime pay, vacation pay, statutory holidays. But lately we've watched our economy and our workforce shift dramatically to the so-called gig economy, and it's become a lot more common. This economy consists of flexible and temporary jobs with workers typically working remotely. And unfortunately, gig work is also often associated with insecurity, irregular earnings, and few, if any, employment protections. This could potentially lead to workers going into debt or falling below the poverty line, or as Matthew brought up, competing against living wage employers. Poverty should not be a feature of the new economy. Instead, BC's labor laws and employment laws should reflect the needs of modern workplaces, both for workers and for employers. As the Parliamentary Secretary for the New Economy, I'm leading in the development of a strategy to address the challenges facing gig and precarious workers, while also balancing the needs to allow innovation in our business community. I look forward to engaging with you again on this as this important work continues in the coming months. The Ministry of Labour has also been taking action in many other key areas to help make life more stable and affordable for British Columbians. And Minister Baines and I share the same enthusiasm for strengthening employment standards for workers. Many low-income workers have been essential workers during the pandemic. In June, we increased the general minimum wage to $15.20 an hour. And we also brought an end to the lower liquor server minimum wage in BC, where 80% of servers are women. Having a fair minimum wage is a key step in our effort to lift people up and out of poverty and to make life more affordable and predictable for families and to build a stronger economic recovery for British Columbians. As many of you know, Fair Wages Commission is working on the third and final part of its mandate to examine the gap between living wages and the minimum wage in BC. This is the first comprehensive government review of living wages in BC, and I look forward to hearing more about the Commission's findings. We know that for many people living in communities like Vancouver, the minimum wage provides only a portion of what households need to cover their basic expenses. And we know that many employers have voluntarily moved to paying a living wage as part of this plan. We've heard from two of these groups today, and they also include Van City Credit Union, the City of New Westminster, the Vancouver Foundation, that are using this to attract and retain talent. During its research and consultation work, the Commission found overwhelming evidence that raising the minimum wage had little to no effect on employment levels. Endorsing this position, economist David Card was just awarded a Nobel Prize for his research that showed an increase in the hourly minimum wage did not lead to reductions in hiring. Workers in BC need the support when it comes to illness because no worker should have to choose between going to work or losing pay. And for the first time ever in BC, we've created a permanent province-wide paid sick leave for employees who cannot work due to personal illness or injury. BC's paid sick leave measures are building on existing measures to support workers during the pandemic, such as the paid sick leave for COVID-related illness and leave from work to get vaccinated. Having permanent paid sick leave is good for businesses, workers, and our communities. COVID-19 has certainly highlighted the importance of staying at home when we're ill. We are currently inviting input from British Columbians on 3 options for the minimum entitlement, up to 3 days, 5 days, or 10 days of paid sick leave. And the new paid sick leave will be finalized later this fall and become effective January 1st, 2022. In closing, once again, I want to thank all of today's panelists for this discussion and the Tamarack Institute for hosting it. I'm heartened that there's so much thought and care going into developing solutions to the problems faced by working populations. And as I said earlier, we need to continue to do all that we can to support vulnerable workers and to ensure that BC labor laws are responsive to the changing economy. It's vital that we face these issues and ensure that all workers in British Columbia are supported and protected. And I'm proud to be taking the lead on making that happen. Thank you for having me here today, and I'm looking forward to the questions and answers coming up next.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was short, but very powerful. And it's just heartening, so heartening to see how, just that strengthening employment standards is in supporting workers is such a part of your work in really looking at the new economy. And it's really exciting to see that, to hear about this prospective analysis of the living wages throughout the province, because that's one of the big challenges is that the cost of living, wages just haven't been able to keep up with the cost of living. And yet we see that, the increasing the minimum wage to over $15 an hour just hasn't impacted hiring practices at all. So that's really heartening. So thank you to all the panelists. Minister Simons, it's wonderful to hear the emphasis on the inter-ministerial approach, and with Morag and Tara, your work with Women Creating Change is really groundbreaking. And with Matthew, your work is groundbreaking as well. And I think that it just really emphasizes how important it is for everybody to be working together towards the same goal, which Minister Simons articulated as the elimination of poverty. altogether, which is admirable. At this point, so I think we better stop there, but I would just really like to thank all of you for your presentations today and just some thoughtful discussion at the end, and got lots of people thinking, lots of people hopefully will be talking, and just to reiterate that all registrants will have access to the recording afterwards, as well as resources that have been mentioned today. So please hold tight for that. That'll be sent in a follow-up email. So I'm just going to share my screen. Great, and just talk about a few upcoming learning opportunities here. So we're very excited to be offering, we're very excited to be offering 3 ways to learn about how we can all work together towards the end of poverty. So we have, first of all, the guide, which is presents high impact policies, evidence-based models, and innovative ideas that poverty reduction practitioners across all sectors can act upon. The podcast series was edited from clips from our End of Poverty National Gathering last May that brought together more than 1,000 people to explore 14 pathways that can end poverty for all Canadians. And just yesterday, we're very excited to launch Communities Ending Poverty Pathways online course. This course has been built on learnings from our May End of Poverty National Gathering, and and is formed by our thought leaders that graciously co-wrote chapters for our End of Poverty guide. So it's got 5 modules exploring the roles of government, business, nonprofits, and communities, can play through policies, collaborations, and big ideas. It's designed for you to go through the content at your own pace. It's accessible to the public for a minimal fee, and paid Community and Ending Poverty's members get 2 free seats. So this is really exciting. We've also got a couple of webinars coming up. Basic income has long been positioned as a means to reduce poverty and improve inequality, but it is also a promising strategy for helping Canadians weather increasingly frequent extreme weather events caused by climate change, and in helping communities transition to a new carbon economy while supporting marginalized populations to thrive. So this is going to be an excellent webinar coming up in November, on November 9th. On November 17th, we have some of our thought leaders to explore the potential intersect between Communities Ending Poverty, our model, and climate transition. So we're focusing a lot these days on the intersect between poverty reduction and climate transitions. And finally, I would just really like to invite participants to join us right now after this webinar for an open networking session immediately following the webinar. And the purpose really is just to provide an opportunity for those who've been participating in the webinar to connect with your peers, to further discuss what you've heard today, and to connect with others working in the field. So, and if you've registered for the webinar, you will be able to access the link, but we also, I should just put this in the chat box as well. Just give me a moment here. And also, as well, while we're thinking about that, I would really like to invite everybody to join our next BC Community Practice. We've had numerous folks across the province working on poverty reduction strategies, and we have some, we'll be having a roundtable discussion regarding that. So finally, again, I would just like to really thank everybody for attending. Thank you to all our panelists. I really appreciate it. And hopefully this will be the beginning of many more discussions to come.